Right, guys, thank you all and thank you very much all of you for coming. This is a series of Lenten talks in which we're looking at the Church of England and the Church in England in terms of 4 challenges. The challenge of liberalism, the challenge of Islam, the challenge of the demographic collapse, and the challenge of unity. And we're going to be looking at tonight the church and the challenge of Islam. However, before we begin, I just want to remind you all that your ticket prices are all going to the persecuted church. So please, if you haven't already settled your tab, do make sure you do that before you leave this evening. And obviously there'll be a 15-minute break in which you can get yourself a drink. So without further ado, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We want to start off just by making some very obvious distinctions, but these distinctions are important nonetheless. What you're about to hear is the challenge of Islam, an ideology, a belief system, a value system, a narrative, and what challenge that presents to us. We need to make clear in our minds that there is a distinction between Islam as a series of values and beliefs and Muslims. And that when we move our magnifying glass over to Muslims, they are not one group of people. There is no homogeneous blob that we can call Muslims. There are different kinds of Muslims, different sects of Muslims, different intensity of belief amongst Muslims. And invariably, unless I state otherwise or make a mistake, when I talk about Muslims, I will probably be meaning what we might otherwise term as Islamists in the modern context. So I want you to bear that in mind because it is important to what you hear as we go forward. And I just want to start off by telling a little bit of a story, a little bit of the history of Islam in the UK. Because the first encounters between England and the peoples of England and the Islamic world was in connection with Vikings, who primarily through trade and an initial raiding enterprise encountered Muslims in occupied Spain. We find, for instance, Islamic coins in Viking treasure chests, and we also know that this came about as Vikings were selling Christians, when they were pagan, they were selling Christians into the Islamic slave markets. Many English people were involved in the noble effort of the Crusades. You have at least 2 English kings, Richard the Lionheart and Edward Longshanks, who both participated in a crusade. And English Christians also joined up with the great military orders, the Knights Templar, the Knights of St. John Hospitaller, to participate in campaigns in Outrima and across the Mediterranean, as well as in liberating Spain. Now, between the late 1500s and mid-1600s, Britain was subject, actually, to Islamic Viking-style raids that were conducted by the Barbary Corsairs, who were coming from North Africa. These Corsairs were often allied or supported by the Ottoman Empire, and they targeted coastal towns across the British Isles, including Ireland, and they captured thousands of sailors during their piracy campaigns in the Atlantic and in the Mediterranean at large. Hundreds of Christians were taken captives of slaves by these raids, and they were sold into the Islamic slave markets, never to be seen again. Particularly of note are the raids upon Devon in the 1620s and the 1630s, and a particularly gruesome attack upon Baltimore in Ireland in 1625. Now, These devastated the local communities, and it resulted in England having to come up with some kind of response. But it demonstrates that Islamic terrorism is not something that is new to England. There is a precedent for it in history. However, sadly, due to sectarian divisions between the Reformed and the Roman churches, and the threat from Catholic Spain, Queen Elizabeth, rather than entering into an alliance against the Barbary Corsairs and the Ottoman Empire, actually sought to make an alliance with the Barbary Corsairs and the Ottoman Empire, particularly with Murad III. And this led to the establishment of the Levant Company that operated throughout the Middle East. In response to the actions of the Corsairs, as well as diplomatic efforts by the English government, the Royal Navy engaged in anti-piracy campaigns by attacking Tripoli. It arrived and displayed its gunboats in front of Tunis to scare these Islamist states into treaty. Diplomatic efforts with the Ottoman Empire and the Barbary states, as well as occasionally paying tributes to the Islamists, occasionally led to the safeguarding of British shipping and the release of captured slaves. However, the threat remained persistent until early in 1816, when the British and the Dutch governments had finally had enough. They sent their fleets to do gunboat diplomacy with the Barbary Corsairs, bombing the major cities along the coast. France also, when it had finally had enough with the Barbary Corsairs, actually invaded Algeria in 1830 and established the French colony there precisely as a response to Islamist attacks. The East India Company that operated from the 17th and 18th centuries meant that British administrators, soldiers and merchants were engaging with Muslim subjects across India, who were then increasingly incorporated into the East India Company and started working for them. Some early Muslims, mainly the sailors known as Lascars, employed by the company, began arriving in British ports, particularly in London and Liverpool, and the British Raj, which lasted until 1858 to 1947, led to increasing numbers of South Asian Muslims travelling to Britain and making it their home, whether as students, professionals or workers, but particularly sailors. There was at this time, in this period of time, particularly in the 1800s, there was a love and a romanticization of novelty, which we discussed last week when we talked about liberalism. And this led to a predisposed Enlightenment sentiment that romanticized the East, and Islam with it. Woking, for instance, became a centre for Islamic scholarship in the UK, and it attracted the first, or some of the first, English converts to Islam, like William Henry Quilliam, who founded Britain's first mosque in Liverpool in 1887. The construction of the Shah Jahan Mosque in Woking in 1889, which was funded by Dr. Gottlieb Wilhelm Leitner, was the first purpose-built mosque in the UK. British Orientalists and administrators engaged with Islamic scholarship, which that began to shape the understanding of Islam amongst the English elites. And Muslim scholars themselves were caught up in that enterprise, such as reformers like Sir Syed Ahmad Khan and William Muir. They debated the role of Islam in colonial governance, which started a movement that led eventually to the creation of Pakistan. World War I saw thousands of Muslims, mainly from British India, serve in the British Army and die for the crown upon the fields in World War I, in Europe, and in other areas. Where are we? Yeah, in other areas around the Mediterranean against Turkey. The end of the Second World War, in which Muslims again served, fought and died for the empire, saw peoples from the colonies after the war invited to settle in the UK. And that was due to the labour shortage created by the sheer loss of life and the number of disabled soldiers returning to the United Kingdom. The 1948 British Nationality Act granted Commonwealth citizens the right to settle in Britain, which led to significant numbers of Muslim migration, particularly from Pakistan, India and Bangladesh. Cities such as Birmingham, Bradford and Manchester saw growing South Asian Muslim communities. Muslim communities began establishing mosques, businesses, cultural centres and other enterprises that began to reflect their culture to the rest of British society. Muslims began doing what is known as dawah, the Christian equivalent of evangelism, and entering into marriages, particularly with non-Muslim women, many of whom would then convert. It's interesting to note that curry became the national dish, as everybody knows, and that there was a number of unique curries that were invented here in the UK. So they're British contributions to cuisine from the Muslim community, modified for the British palate. Muslims, along with other settlers from the colonies, suffered from racism, particularly through the 1950s to the 1990s. Meanwhile, from the 1980s, unbeknown to most people except the elites, organised gangs of Muslims began to systematically target and rape vulnerable white and Sikh girls. The Sikh community organised itself to defend its children, whereas the white working class community did not, and the issue continued until being exposed quite recently, even this year. The reason why this issue was swept under the rug for so many decades is because the liberal establishment was frightened of giving food to the political right, of giving oxygen to the political right. The Salman Rushdie affair between 1988 and 1989, which still had consequences for Salman Rushdie just a few years ago, saw for the first time the liberal elites being confronted with an Islamist agenda, which asserted that their religious and cultural identity should be respected, calling for blasphemy laws and leading to the burning of the book, the Satanic Verses, protests, and occasionally those protests turned violent, which forced Salman Rushdie into hiding, where he was protected by the British state. The 1990s saw particularly intense efforts to create a sense of a multicultural society in the wider culture, something that is being pushed now almost as an unquestionable dogma of the liberal elites. The attacks on September the 11th in the USA in 2001 and the attacks in London on 7/7 in 2005, where there were bombings in London, saw the return of Islamic terrorism to these islands that had not been seen since the 1600s. The resultant war on terror demonstrated that the liberal elites were unwilling to see this as a conflict with Islam, but rather as a conflict with some generic radicalism, though this did lead to an increased scrutiny of the Muslim community, with policies such as in Prevent being established in 2003, aiming to steer young Muslims away from what we would call the radical narrative. However, that was then criticised by some Islamists as being something that cultivated Islamophobia. And it seems that the focus now of Prevent is to talk about political right-wing narratives in terms of the threat of the political right. After each terrorist attack that we've seen in the UK, The British society has gone out of its way to reassure the Muslim community that they are welcome and that they are part of our society. The terrorist attacks in America led to a 20-year expedition into Afghanistan and a nearly 15-year expedition into Iraq, both of which came to nothing. Liberals were unable to establish the principles of liberalism in these countries, and both of these countries have since become Islamist states. These operations were designed to push liberal concepts of freedom. These concepts never took root. Since the rise of ISIS, the United Kingdom has become a net exporter of Islamist radicalism. More Muslims from the UK went to fight for ISIS than have ever joined the British Army, by contrast. British Muslims, particularly second and third generation, have engaged in every part of British society. They're involved in politics, they're involved in the arts, they're involved in academia. Whichever aspect of society you want to mention, you'll find Muslim representation there. Figures such as Sadiq Khan have helped to centre frame Islamic culture within London, for instance, celebrating Ramadan over the last 2 years rather than Lent or Easter, bearing in mind that officially we are a Christian nation. Baroness Warsi was the first Muslim woman to become a member of a UK cabinet. And this reflects a socio-political shift. And this process of centre framing Islam as an essential part of British culture is something that the liberal elites continue to do today. King Charles hosted recently an iftar meal in St. George's Hall, for instance. Today, Islam is the second largest religion in the UK with approximately 3.9 million adherents, according to the 2021 census, and it is most certainly one of the fastest growing, primarily through either migration or large families, but certainly a combination of both, though it's questionable as to which one is pushing the numbers higher the fastest. For instance, the most popular name in the UK has for a while been Muhammad, when you add up the variant names and the variant spellings of Muhammad, when you add them up together. But however, we mustn't doubt for 1 second that there are also large numbers of converts to Islam, particularly women who marry Muslim men and then later take on the Islamic faith. Now, this history is to just give us a bit of a backdrop for us to talk about Islamization. Now, what do I mean by Islamization? Islamization is a process by which society, culture, and economy and politics recenter themselves around an Islamic narrative. That's what Islamization is. It's the same with liberalization. Liberalization is the process by which society, economics, politics, and culture recenters itself around a liberal narrative. Now, we've all seen liberalization. One of the expressions of liberalization is what we could say is sexualization. The 1960 sexual revolution and the sexualization of culture. Well, that's an expression of liberalization. So you all know what I mean by an isation of something. So when I'm talking about Islamization, I am talking about that kind of process, but connected to Islam. But I want to remind you that on a far bigger scale, our society has been liberalized, sexualized, individualized, nationalized by the forces of liberalism. And so we need to remember that even though I'm now about to talk about Islamization, it's actually a far smaller phenomena than the process of liberalization. And I just want you to bear that in mind, because to talk about it, you might start to think that it's the biggest thing that is going on in the world right now for Christians in these islands, but actually it's not. And I just want to put that in there. So examples of Islamization are things like the fact that 72% of sheep and goat slaughter now in the UK is done through halal methodology. 5% of calves are slaughtered in halal methods. 4% of all cattle are slaughtered in halal process. UK banks have started to adopt Sharia-compliant finances, trying to avoid the practice of interest, which is considered haram according to certain Islamist interpretations of Islam. We've seen in our culture and in our society a quasi-Islamic enforcement of blasphemy laws. So, for example, who knows about the man that recently burnt a Quran in Manchester and was arrested for the act? Put your hands up. Yeah? Who knows about the boys in Wakefield who scuffed a Quran and then whose parents were forced by the police to go into a mosque and give a public apology? Put your hand up. Yeah. Who knows about the teacher in Batley and Spen who taught a lesson on blasphemy and has had to spend the last few years in hiding because of death threats? So we've seen an enforcement of quasi-Islamic blasphemy laws in the UK, and the British state has leaned into those things. I'm sure that you're all aware that the Labour government under Sir Keir Starmer plans to introduce actual Islamophobia laws, the definitions of which will dampen down the possibility to criticise Islam, depending on the definition that they finally use. We've seen murder attempts in the UK because of Islamic apostasy laws. I give you the example of the Christian confessor, a Christian UK-based confessor of Nisa Hussein, whose family converted to Christianity in Bradford, and were then, after a series of attacks by members of the Muslim community, which then led to an assassination attempt, was forced to leave Bradford under armed guard. Neither the police, nor the Church of England, nor the state, nor the media sought to give the man any assistance. I know personally, myself as an individual, Muslims who have had to flee Christians from a Muslim background who have had to flee cities for the crime of just becoming a Christian, where they've been threatened with death, where they've been intimidated, where they've been assaulted for becoming Christians, and they've had to leave their home. They've been disowned by their families, they've been made homeless. And these are things that are happening in the UK. Do you think of the UK as a country that has internally displaced refugees? Well, it does. And they're all Christians who've left Islam. The liberal establishment has done nothing about it. We know, for example, and we've seen on social media examples of Muslims boasting about the practice of polygamy in the UK, which is technically illegal, and yet there has been no prosecutions. And this has resulted in examples of where polygamous marriages are established that have no legal grounding in the courts, because the British courts don't recognise polygamous marriages, so those women don't have any legal rights, but where the women are living as single individuals on the benefit system. And this is happening Nobody wants to talk about it. We've got the fact that the Adhan is projected by megaphone into people's homes. How many of you think that I would get stopped by the police if I walked into a Muslim area with a megaphone and started blasting a Christian message into people's homes? But yet mosques are allowed to blast offensive messages into the homes of Christians, atheists, Hindus, Sikhs, through the megaphone of through voice projection devices. As we've already highlighted earlier, we've seen the example of Ramadan lights, which is a direct imitation of Christmas lights, sponsored and pushed by Sadiq Khan in London. Just in the last election, we've seen upwards of 5 MPs elected to Parliament solely on their basis of supporting an Islamist regime in Palestine in its fight against Israel. We've seen MPs in Parliament reject the idea of outlawing first cousin marriages, despite the fact that it is demonstrably harmful to the generations that come from those families. And it is a problem that exists in a far higher proportion within the Muslim community. We've seen Muslim MPs in Parliament call for the banning of book burning, the Quran, the Bible and other books. And rather than say no, Sir Keir Starmer has said that they want to support the Muslim community in tackling Islamophobia. Bearing in mind that these same Labour MPs have never once protested or said anything about the desecration of the Bible by liberal artists, or blasphemous and insulting shows by the liberal arts against the Christian faith, such as the Jerry Springer opera, or the Piss crucifix, or the graffiti Bible. We have seen examples of Muslim prison gangs acting with impunity within the prison system, which has resulted in 2023 for 25 Christians to begin legal action against the Home Secretary for failing to protect them from these Muslim gangs that are operating in the prison system. Islamization is a real thing. It is happening. Now, the secular, liberal, humanist state that we live in cannot and does not want to oppose this process of Islamization. And I want to explain why. There is a citizen's contract between the citizen and the state that is understood to be an individualized contract. And so the state doesn't think in terms of groups, it just thinks in terms of individuals. And a liberal secular democracy works according to its demos. And so demography counts for far more in the operations and the functions of the state than any sense of the preservation of history, culture, or tradition. Liberals are quite happy to see it change, just so long as that's the majority of people that want to see it change. The concerns of state security and stability are prior to any maintenance of a Christian heritage in this land. And so, if it serves the end of security and stability, history, tradition, and culture will be thrown to the side. Liberalism has historically sought always to keep Christianity out of politics, and liberals are culturally triggered when they see Christians trying to do politics as Christians. They see it as, you are imposing your religion on other people. But if Muslims try to do it, it's seen as, you're just expressing your culture. There's a blind spot in the liberal mindset. Progressive liberalism particularly is inherently anti-Christian due to its concerns around intersectionality, which leads it to conclude that white Christian males are the leading oppressor, and so they have to be pushed aside for minority groups that are being oppressed by their existence. Now, the Church of England, as we stated in our last talk, has simply gone along with this process. Though the responses seem to be congregational in nature. So whilst there are some individual congregations that seek, for instance, to evangelize the Muslim community, the majority don't. The bishops are pretty much silent on the topic and rarely, if ever, speak about it. But whenever they do, they always frame such conversations within the concerns of building a multicultural society. And that actually leads them to supporting the process of Islamization within the UK. Few churches see or are brave enough or want to do evangelization amongst Muslims. The Church of England now regularly offers its churches to celebrate iftar meals. And if you go to the Church of England website, you can actually find 5 pages of guidance about how you do that. All Saints Church in Kingston hosted a joint Milad and Christmas event which celebrated Muhammad's birthday. The Church of England seems to show no evidence of being committed to the process of evangelism towards the Muslim community, or any other group for that matter. They're just as disinterested in evangelizing Buddhists and just as disinterested in evangelizing Hindus, though occasionally you might find that they want to evangelize non-believing middle-class agnostics and atheists. We've also recently seen the fact that the Church of England has got caught up in the fact that a number of its ministers have been less than discerning in who they give baptism to, and have been found to be unscrutinizing in offering out baptism to people that have turned out to be false claimants of refugee status due to their conversion to Christianity. Something that the Church of England doesn't seem to have much sense of how to handle. I want to highlight to you the reality of what an Islamized state looks like. Now, I could just point to the example of Saudi Arabia or Syria or Afghanistan or Iran or northern Sudan or northern Nigeria. I could point to those examples, but I doubt many of you will go away and do the research. So I'm just going to highlight some of the realities that happen for Christians in an Islamic state. And I brought some books with some hefty quotes to try and exemplify that to you. So one book that I would encourage you to get hold of is The Myth of the Al-Andalusian Paradise, which is this book here. And also, if you really want to go deep into this, this is a manual book of fiqh, Islamic law, called The Reliance of the Traveller, and it's from the Shafi school. And if anyone has any doubts that what I'm about to say next is true, challenge me and I'll quote from the books. However, within an Islamic state, Christians will be subject to an apartheid system based upon religion. We will become second-class citizens. We will have less rights than Muslim citizens in an Islamic state. It will be a religious apartheid in which you will be discriminated against in every area of your life. This is known as dhimitude. And you will pay for your life by paying a tax, a poll tax called the jizya tax, which is essentially a protection money. You know, like if someone came to this establishment and offered the owner, you know, pay me £250 or £500 a month and I'll make sure that no one smashes your windows in. By the way, if you don't pay it, I'll be smashing your windows in. That's what a protection racket is, and that's what the jizya is. You pay it or you die. You pay it or you be made a slave. In terms of marriage, you're going to be discriminated against. Christian men won't be able to marry Muslim women, but Christian women will be able to marry Muslim men. Therefore, Muslim women are being restricted in who they can marry, and you will be restricted in who you can marry. But there'll be no restriction upon the Muslim man who they can marry, except so long as the people in the groups are Christians or Jews not related to Zoroastrians. In terms of punishment for murder, you'll be discriminated against. The blood money, which is an Islamic what's the word I'm looking for? Reparation for murder. The value of the blood money paid for you will be less than paid for a Muslim. So you will literally, your life will literally be valued less than your Muslim equivalent. And if a Muslim were to kill a Christian, their punishment would be blood money, but they could never lose their life. But if a Muslim killed a Muslim, as punishment, the death penalty could be one of the punishments. So you're going to be discriminated in that way. There'll be no new buildings of churches, and churches won't be allowed to be repaired under Islamic law, which means that our institutions will be discriminated against. Whereas obviously mosques will be able to be built. In the past, Christians won't be allowed to build buildings higher than Muslim buildings. Think about that for a second. Why make such a rule? The point is to communicate that you are lesser. You are beneath, literally beneath the Muslim host. Anyone who chooses to convert to the Christian faith could be killed under the apostasy laws. We've already spoke about a jizya. However, within Islam, Muslims will be able to own Christian slaves. Christians wouldn't be allowed to own Muslim slaves. Not that I think any Christian wants to own a slave. But the fact of the matter is, you wouldn't be allowed to. But a Muslim could own you, and yes, Islam does permit the continuity of slavery. In fact, it's instituted within the religion. Furthermore, regardless of what you may have heard in the media, jihad is a prescribed condition of an Islamic state. So if there is an Islamic state with a caliph, then that state is obliged under Islam to wage jihad against non-believers. That means you. And one of the reasons why we see Islamic terrorist networks operating is because in Islamic law, if there isn't a caliph, you don't need to ask permission. And actually, this is one of the divisions within the Islamic community within the spectrum of the radicals as to whether you can use violence or not without a caliph. It's one of their debating points. Now, I've laid out for you some of the history. I've laid out for you the ineffectiveness of liberalism and why it's ineffective. And I've laid out for you the reality of what Islamization looks like. Now I want to present to you, before we go into our break, I want to present to you what I think needs to be a Christian response. And then what we will do is we'll spend the 45 minutes after the break to discuss the response and to discuss any other issues that you've heard tonight with any other questions that have come to mind. So, if Christians are going to respond to Islamization and the existential threat that Islamization poses to us as the Christian people, the first part of our response is we have got to cultivate a stronger sense of our own identity as Christians. And that's got to come before any other identity. Whether you're British or Indian or Polish or Russian or any other nationality, whether you're black or white or Asian, all of that must be absolutely secondary. Our identity needs to be couched deeply and firmly in Christ alone. Amen. And we need to embody that sense of identity with zeal and with confidence. Not just as individuals, but in a conscious awareness that we are a collective, that we are the body of Christ. Yes. And that needs to be expressed in all areas of our life. Whether it be collective, whether that be economic, political, social, or cultural. Now, evangelism is important. It is an important part of the response. But I want to make it clear. Let me dispel the myth that some of you will have. This problem is not going to be solved by more prayer meetings. This problem is not going to be solved by more evangelism. The checkmate rests ultimately in politics. But evangelism nonetheless must be part of the response. Now, in the current way that the church exists and has its modus operandi and its pattern of life, our evangelism will only be effective around the edges of the Muslim community. So I would advise you, if you want to do more evangelism in your churches towards Muslims, then aim for the Muslims that are already on the edges of the Muslim community, the ones that are halfway out, the ones that are facing the exit door anyway, the ones to whom Islam has already failed. Look to those people first. However, if we are able, and we should pursue this, to establish a Christian state, then with the backing of that state, I believe that we can see mass conversions of the Muslim community in the UK. And as a precursor towards moving towards that Christian state, I would argue that we need to adopt increasingly the Benedict option of doing church life. If you don't know what that is, ask me in the Q&A, or you can get the book by Robert Dreher, I think that's his name, called The Benedict Option, and that will highlight it for you. I think it needs a couple of tweaks, but it's essentially pointing in the right direction. We as Christians, as a counter to Islamization, need to pursue Christianization. We need to Christianize the culture. And we need, therefore, to rediscover cultural expressions of Christianity and to celebrate them with vigor and with commitment. And we need to emphasize what makes us different, not what makes us the same. What separates us from the rest of society, not what makes us like the rest of society. Economically, we need to support Christian businesses and create an internal Christian economy. And we also need to boycott practices like halal. And I'll give you a reason why, because most of you will jump to the wrong conclusion. It's got nothing to do with the idea that halal is demon food, right? It's not, obviously. You could just pray over it if that was the problem. But the problem, let me ask you this question. Do you think that it is acceptable, put your hand up, if you agree with me that it is unacceptable for a Christian to sponsor missionaries from the Mormon Church? Okay, that it's unacceptable. Put your hand up if you think it's unacceptable for a Christian to do that, to sponsor Mormon missionaries. Okay, so the vast majority of you recognize that fact. Well, halal leads to the payment of zakat. And zakat funds Islamic missionary work. If you buy halal meat, you will be funding Islamic missionary work. And that is the reason why you should boycott halal. As Christians in our society, we need to develop Christian structures and organize as a community bigger than our congregational church, networks and movements and initiatives that can begin to shape and move society according to the understanding of the Christian faith. And structurally, as I've said before, Christians need to adopt the Benedict option, which is that Christians consolidate, that we consolidate our resources, that we consolidate our manpower, that we consolidate our energies so that we can more effectively do these kinds of responses that I'm talking about. And finally, as the bell announces the point for the break, the church needs to rediscover a political narrative. It needs to rediscover a political agenda as the people of the covenant, as the people of God. We have concerns as a people, and we need to have them expressed politically. And that means a commitment to the kingdom of God above all else, which ultimately, if we think about it and think it through, leads us to the conclusion that we should pursue the establishment of a new Christendom. And that is the response that I offer. So guys, we're 1 minute over time. Please do grab yourself a coffee, a tea, pay up your bill for this talk, and then we'll reconvene at 8 o'clock. Right, guys, we're going to make a start. So if everybody could grab their seats, please. And if everybody could bring their conversations to an end. We've done the last 45 minutes to kind of frame this next 45 minutes. And so this is now your opportunity to ask questions or to bring up comments. All I would ask is, because obviously there's a lot of people in and we want to allow for as many comments and questions as possible, if you do decide to make a comment that you want me to respond to rather than a question, just keep it short. And so I will be gently timing people who are making comments. And if I feel you're going on, I might encourage you just to come to your point, as I do know what it is to get lost in a sentence. So without further ado then, who wants to kick off the conversation part of this? And we'll go on for about 45 minutes. First come, first serve. And it doesn't matter how many times you've spoke, you can go several times. Go on.
So Derek Wynn said, all across the world, 5 times in every mosque, there is anti-Christian proclamation going out. So how many times we as Christians are proclaiming that Jesus Christ is Lord? So it is important in our waking life, in our going out, coming in, every day, proclaim that Jesus Christ is Lord. And also we are living in exciting times. We will see Islam destroyed. That's what I think. And earlier it was actual warfare. Now it's like time for us to do the spiritual warfare, and we will see Islam destroyed, especially here.
So I just want to point out that, you know, for Christians in places like Nigeria and Syria and Iraq, Lebanon, you know, it isn't a spiritual warfare. It's a bullets flying warfare that they've had to undergo. And I think, there is a risk for Christians that we over-spiritualize this because we are living in a more comfortable situation. I think, it goes without saying that as Christians, we should be living by the Lordship of Christ. But what does that mean in a way that's actually useful in terms of Islamization? Well, it means that as Christians, we have to throw off, firstly, liberalism. Because liberalism, as I've tried to demonstrate, clears away a space for Islamization. And liberalism is actually the bigger problem. But it means that as Christians, we live a life that is distinctively Christian. And that's how we proclaim the Lordship of Christ every day. And an essential part of that is for us to rediscover what a Christian culture looks like and what a Christian political project looks like. And having loyalty to our faith above any other concern. That includes our jobs, our reputations, our status in society, our freedom, whether we are considered to be the good guys or the bad guys. I think one of the big problems in our churches is that they've been captured by the comfortableness of the leadership. There's a middle-class cowardice in the church leadership that results in a timidity within the wider church. So I'm just trying to respond to your comment. Go on.
I was going to say, you say that we should put our faith above any other concern. Does that include our country and our loyalty to our country?
Yes, absolutely. Our loyalty to one another as Christians must come above our loyalty to the United Kingdom, or to the European Union, or to the UN, or to NATO, or to any other extra biblical gathering, network, or community. Our loyalty as Christians needs to be towards our brothers and sisters, both within a city, within a region, within a country, and then across the world. You know, I want to just take questions and comments, so do feel free to come back and.
Hi. In terms of Christian response, at this point in time, like a lot of people, I'm very concerned about these so-called Islamophobia laws, which is an awful made-up term. I wrote to my local MP to express my concern, and I said, as a Christian, we should be against all forms of bigotry, whether it's anti-Buddhist, anti-Muslim, anti-black, whatever. All of these bigotries are wrong. But Muslims are already legally protected, rightly so. This Islamophobia thing is a devious device to clamp down and prevent constructive, legitimate criticism of Islam, which directly affects us as Christians, but non-Christians need to realise it's going to impact on them too. So my question really is, what do you think is the best way of responding to what's coming down?
Yeah, I think the best, there certainly is a push to establish Islamophobia laws. Notice there's no concern around Hinduphobia. There's no concern around Buddhaphobia. There's no concern around Christophobia. And the reason for that is because the concept of Islamophobia was started actually by the Muslim Brotherhood. It was started by Islamists as a way of silencing criticism of Islam. And it has caught on in the alt-left, and it has become mainstream within left-wing politics because it is understood by the alt-left as a form of racism. Now, the fact that the Muslim community itself will say that it's not a race, that it is a religious community, seems to have escaped all of these left-wingers, and it shows the willingness of Islamists to push narratives that don't even correspond to their own faith's teachings for political gain. Something that the liberal left just does not recognise, and liberals generally don't. In terms of our best response, and you know, as Christians, we're entitled to disagree with this. I think that the way that we need to respond to this is to push about Christophobia, and to argue that actually, if we're going to have a law defending against Islamophobia, we need a similar law that defends against Christophobia. And I think what will end up happening is if we push that law, then the Hindu community will say, we want a law that talks about Hinduphobia. And eventually what will happen is that the market of phobia laws will get so flooded that the whole concept will collapse as a legal concept. However, if we don't push for similar Christophobia laws, then what we're going to end up with, and we've already seen that Labour is willing to introduce discriminatory practices legally, we're going to end up having a lower status legally as Christians in this country, where we are not protected from prejudice against us on the basis of religion. And if opponents say, well, actually, no, that's not true, you are, well, surely those same laws, therefore, already are protecting Muslims, in which case, why do we need Islamophobia laws?
Exactly.
You see my point? Next question, comment. Go on.
I'll keep it simple. Is there a tipping point for an Islamized state to become an Islamic state? Could you talk about that to the best of your understanding, please?
Yeah, it's going to be driven by demographics. You know, people say that. I remember years and years ago speaking to a confident Nigerian Christian who said that there would never be an Islamic state in Nigeria. And now there are at least, I believe, 3 states in North Nigeria that operate under Sharia law. The belief that Sharia legal systems can't become normative is a fantasy. We've already seen elements of Sharia law being implemented in the UK at the acceptance of those things by the entire establishment, including bishops of the Church of England. What would lead to the tipping point between some codification of Sharia law within a Western liberal society and an outright Islamist state is all about demographics, which is why next week's talk's really important. Yeah, because one of the biggest challenges that the church faces, if not the biggest, even Trump's liberalism, is demographic collapse. And so if we reach a point where upwards of 50 or more % of the population of the UK are Muslim, then I think we will see a very strong push within the Muslim community by Islamists for Sharia law to be a bigger part of the legal system. So, and if a majority of people in this country were Muslim, I think that inevitably you would end up with a Sharia legal system, and that would be unpreventable. And the point is, a liberal, secular, humanist democracy cannot stop the process, because a liberal, secular, humanist democracy understands that all of us just have an individual contract with the state where we have rights and responsibilities. But it does not care about your culture or religion in that understanding of the contract. And so, if it ends up that the majority of citizens in that contract are Muslim, the liberal secular state would just fold in accepting Sharia law. So it's all about demographics. That's the key. Go on.
Just a quick
Sorry, I just want to let Shirley, because she hasn't asked a question. Go on.
I want to know what's happening with the church, why they are giving into all these things. What is wrong with the church itself?
Okay, so I would just say, guys, as Christians, we need to stop talking about the Church of England as if it is the church. How many of you in this room do not go to a Church of England church? Put your hand up.
We don't.
Right, put your hand up then. So, like, the vast majority of don't even go to the Church of England. So when we talk about the church, who are we talking about? So let's be clearer with our language. And that also includes, let's be clearer when we're talking about Muslims, because too often people use language clumsily and they speak about Muslims as if they're just one blob of people and they're all the same. It's not true. But it's also not true to talk about the church as if it's all the same. So I think your question is about the Church of England. Why has the Church of England just gone along with this? And I actually answered that last week. The Church of England was created to serve the English elites. That is its primary purpose. It isn't to serve Christ, it's to serve the English elites. And while it's established, it always will do. But now that those elites themselves are not Christian, then the Church of England just goes along with the elites and what the elites want. There is no doubt in my mind at all that if Mosley the fascist had somehow managed to become the leader of the United Kingdom, the Church of England would have gone right along with his entire agenda, backing him up all the way. Because it doesn't matter who the elites are, the Church of England always serves them, even if they're not Christians, even if they're anti-Christian. And that's the problem within the Church of England. It sees itself and is structurally codified to be and cultivates the sense of being the servant of the British state. Any other questions? Go on, sir.
So thanks. I have my own concerns about the growth of Islamic culture, you might say, in the country. But I often hear people like Tommy Robinson talk about, I've heard him say, I don't have a problem with Muslims, I have a problem with Islam. Personally, I think it's the other way around. I think that a lot of the cultures, the Muslim cultures that we have in this country, come from quite backward places. So I'm sorry in advance if anybody is Pakistani here, but Pakistan is just generally quite a backwards country with quite a backwards mentality in comparison to, let's say, Western European cultures. So I personally think that the problem is more rooted in the culture they're coming from. So just as an example, let's say in this country, the South Asian Muslim population is, say, 2 million people. Now, if you change those people for 2 million Indonesians and Malaysians, we wouldn't have the same problems because the mentality is very different. The culture is different. So to me, it's more of a cultural problem. I personally think Islam has many very good things in it, and a lot of Muslims have very admirable qualities. I think some of the examples you've used are the most extreme end of it. So I just wondered what you thought about that, really.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and it's really important that we stress this, is that again and again and again, we mustn't think of Muslims as being a homogenous blob of people that all think the same, that all do the same, that all act the same. It's just not true. There are different sects of Islam that compete with one another, and obviously there's a spectrum of intensity of belief within Islam. The issue obviously doesn't come from Muslims who don't have an intense following or practice of their faith. The problems are coming from those that do. And if you look at, for instance, secularized Muslims from Turkey or from Indonesia, as you've pointed out, though I would point out that Christians are persecuted in Indonesia and they are persecuted in Malaysia, and don't think that they're not, because they really are. But there are examples of secularized Muslim communities, like, for instance, Tunisia. It would be an example. Turkey, as I've already stated, would be an example. And such Muslims obviously don't present any kind of issues. However, the problem is, and this is the problem, is that Islam, the book, Islam, the religion, Islam, the doctrine and the values, does teach these kinds of problematic concepts, like turning us as Christians into second-class citizens as the dhimmi. And at any point in time, any Muslim could tap into those narratives. At any point in time, any Muslim could absorb those narratives and say that it is theirs. And so the strategy of the British state has been, because of its individualized concept of the contract, has been to let the lake grow and then catch the individual problematic fish. And the idea also is to try and poison the water to the Islamists. But all the evidence seems to suggest that that argument is being lost. That actually radicalization is growing. It's still a minority, let's be clear. It's still a minority within the Muslim community, but it is a growing minority. And the British state doesn't want to wrestle with that issue. It can't wrestle with it because it ideologically cannot say that the problem is the teachings of Islam. Culturally, liberals are against that idea. Sorry, I'm going to let other people ask questions. Go on.
Could you expand on the Benedict option? Because I'm still trying to understand.
I just want to come back and finish the answer that I was giving before I take yours. So the necessity, therefore, is that we replace liberalism as the guiding principle of the nation with a more muscular Christianity. Because a more muscular Christianity will more easily be able to assess the realities that create the problems that we face and to deal with them in a way that liberalism has shown itself to be exhausted in trying to find solutions. Now, coming to the Benedict option and to your question, the Benedict option is about churches consolidating. And by consolidating, what I literally mean is that as Christians, we need to move into the same areas. And when we become the dominant demographic of those areas, deliberately Christianize them, consciously Christianize them, and start building the church outward from those consolidated geographical strongholds. The parish system doesn't work. It's dying, it's failing. Your idea of an individual congregation in an ocean of non-belief isn't working. It's failing. It's dying everywhere. So why are we holding on to it? Consolidation allows us to magnify our presence, our impact, our resources, our manpower. It eases the stress on logistical efforts. It allows us to capture the economics, the politics, the culture of an area. Now, I'm not a fantasist. I don't think that, like Calvinists on this side and Roman Catholics on that side are all going to be able to live in the same Benedict community. I would love that to be possible, but it won't. So what I'm saying is, all the Baptists consolidate in one place, all the Anglicans consolidate in another place, all the Roman Catholics consolidate in another place, the Orthodox in another place, and let the best church win. But the thing is, the Benedict option works for whoever uses it. It works. If you don't believe that the Benedict option works, just go to Tower Hamlets and see who's what's the governing principle in Tower Hamlets. If you don't believe that the Benedict option works, go to Golders Green and go and look at what's the governing culture in Golders Green. If you don't believe it works, just look at Northern Ireland, where you've got two political communities have hammered it out by both using the Benedict option. Whoever uses the Benedict option, it works for them. Go and look at the Mormons in Utah. Whoever uses the Benedict option, it works. So we Christians need to adopt it.
I was going to ask, could that look like relocating to a different country?
Well, I mean, it could look that way, but the point is, if we all start abandoning ship, that we're adding to the demographic collapse. And the thing is, the church is in demographic collapse, as we'll talk about in depth next week. And running away to another country is just going to add to the problem. That's retreat. And if the church keeps retreating, You know, the more, we don't need to retreat, what we need to do is consolidate. It's just sound strategy for any group of people that when your lines are broken and when your resources and networks and communications are broken, that you consolidate, because that allows you to regroup. And the church has suffered a defeat, and we need to regroup before we can start to advance again.
Yeah. Can I say, I go to Speaker's Corner every Sunday, and we often see Bob there. What happened 2 years ago is the Muslims said that they were boasted they're going to take over Speaker's Corner. And what we've now found, perhaps you can confirm it, is that there are more Christians now praying for the corner. More Christians are going. The atmosphere's changed. So what seemed to be a place where dominated by Muslims, you've now got Christians there engaging with Muslims, sharing the gospel, giving away John's gospel, Luke's gospel. And if I could say about Bob, someone would heckle him and say, "Are you a Catholic or a Protestant?" Can I quote Bob's answer? "I don't believe in denominations." So what we found at Speaker's Corner is we're all united, sharing the gospel. So you'll find Christians who are Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, whatever, sharing the gospel. And we found if you deliberately try and take out, try and influence one area, God will bless it, and we're seeing a breakthrough.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, you know, like, to some degree, the things that I keep banging on about, I've demonstrated the utility of at Speaker's Corner. When I came there 6 years ago, Muslims dominated Speaker's Corner. And just 2 years ago, they were talking about, you know, like up to 2 years ago, they were talking about taking over Speaker's Corner. And there was a very deliberate attempt to push and bully everybody out. And stalwart Christians who just are stubborn as an ox just refused to leave. But we've consistently been bringing down the kind of Christians that can be effective at Speaker's Corner. Christians who are trained in apologetics, who are emotionally stable and well-grounded, and who are physically fit and who are physically strong, or at least have the willingness to an ability to stand up for themselves. And what we've seen is a dramatic reduction in the number of people becoming Muslims at Speaker's Corner. We've seen lots of the main Muslim speakers leave Speaker's Corner because for them it's just not the easy ride that it used to be. We've seen an increase in the number of Muslims becoming Christians from Speaker's Corner, as well as everybody else. And one of the things that it highlights for me, quite separate from Speaker's Corner, is the importance of social media. The absolute importance of social media as the means of evangelizing Western civilization. The place where people go for information is not the high street. The place where people go for information is on social media, and that's where the church needs to be doing its evangelism, because that is the place of public debate. So yeah, go on, bro.
Yeah, you said the best way to deal with Islamization is through politics. So how do you centre your politics around Christ? And the reason I ask that is because my church seems to be scared to touch politics.
Yep. Because
they're fearful of diluting the Gospels.
Yes.
So my question is, how do you centre your politics around Christ?
Brilliant question. And I want to be clear. I mean, I do apologetics. Like, that's my daily bread, as it were, in terms of my work. But I am not fooled into thinking that clever answers are going to win this situation. Right? The number of people that are open to changing their faith because of intellectual discussion is very small. It's a very small percentage of people. The number of people that might change their faith at all is very small as a number of people, because we just don't live in a culture in which the right questions are ever proposed. Actually, we live in a culture that distracts us constantly from asking deeper and more meaningful questions. And so your ability to get airtime doesn't work. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people have a radical change in outlook when their world, where their world collapses because of some kind of crisis. Because suddenly the harsh realities of life break through, and you have to deal with more profound questions than what am I going to be doing this Friday night. But in terms of our politics, it does not matter how effective, it does not matter how much evangelism we do, and it does not matter how clever our answers are. If Islamists, who are very much trying to capture the apparatus of the state, gain control of the courts, the police, and the councils and government, it is checkmate. And that checkmate could last for centuries. And so as Christians, whether you want to play the game of chess or not, that game of chess is being played against you. And you will either deal with it or you will be outmaneuvered. And that is exactly what is happening because of incompetent church leaders who think one-dimensionally and think that the answer to every problem is saying more rosaries, or having a more biblically accurate sermon, or doing more evangelism, right? These one-answer kind of attitudes, or having more of the experience of the power of God. Having these one silver bullet kind of answers is one-dimensional thinking. And it is leaving the church to being outmaneuvered on every front, which is why we're always in retreat. As Christians, we need to stop playing the chess that is being played against us. And that means that we have to create a political narrative. And how do you center that on Christ? Well, you seek to establish a new Christendom in which the laws of the land and the institutions of the state embody and reflect Christian values because the state has committed itself to Christian doctrine. And that's how you sort of center your place on Christ. Go on.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about the Christian state you want to see or what you envision?
So to be clear, what a Christian state would look like is pretty open for debate. You know, if you think about the church, it's lived through 2,000 years of history. It started in a Roman Empire. It has lived through and lived in pagan kingdoms, Aryan kingdoms, then Christian kingdoms. It's lived under Islamic caliphates. It has lived under the birth of the nation state. It's lived in anarchistic societies. It's lived under the USSR. The church, the church's existence is not predicated upon a Christian state. It just is helped by a Christian state. So what a Christian state looks like in practice and what it should look like in practice, I'm very pragmatic about. I'm actually sold on the idea of a Christian democracy. And the reason why I like the idea of a Christian democracy is because one of the great wonders of democracy is it allows you to change your government without having to use the sword. And so I'm in favor of a Christian democracy as a Christian state. But there are other Christians that want a return to a Christian monarchy. I would disagree with them. You know, Christians in the past have practiced Christian dictatorships. You know, you look at Franco, for example, you know, which is arguably, questionably, either a fascist state or a fascist Christian state, depending on how you interpret Franco. So the Christians do have different perspectives, and Christianity doesn't prescribe the shape of such a Christian state. I think that's what we work out with fear and trembling. Next question.
Thank you.
Go on, bro.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. So you were mentioning, or you're saying that Islamism, the state wants to take over, and if we're not careful, then it will. Realistically, how far away are we from that happening?
I'm not a prophet. I couldn't guess. You know, if you look at the census between, you look at the last census and the census before that, you can see that there is clear evidence of integration of the Muslim community into society. And one of the indicators of that is that the average age of the Muslim community has increased. In other words, they're starting to track along the same path of the rest of us. They're having fewer children, which is an example of integration. You know, but we can also see, and we've all seen at the last election, like I say, you know, a number of MPs who have been elected purely on the platform of supporting a foreign Islamist regime in the Middle East. And so the truth is that we are seeing the penetration of Islamists into the state apparatus. Now, when I say Islamist, again, I want to put it on a spectrum. You know, not every Islamist is a jihadi, you know, that's planning a terrorist attack. Some people who fall into the category of Islamists are people who want to achieve an Islamic state through peaceful means. You know, like me, I want to achieve a Christian state through peaceful means. You know, so but they are using whatever influence, power, and authority they have to advance that agenda. Now, how far we are off assumes that it's inevitable. And I don't think it's inevitable. I think it is one of a few possible horizons that we can now see. One of those horizons is an Islamified state of these islands. But there are other possibilities that are on the horizon. And so I wouldn't want to put a guess on it, but the clearest indicator to how close we are is just to watch the demographics. Just watch the population percentages. Because when we reach that golden number, if we ever reach that golden number, because there's no guarantee that we will, you know, but if we ever reach a point where the Muslim population is 50% or over, I don't see how we're not going to end up with increasing aspects of Sharia law, if not complete Sharia law as the governing principle of society. But I wouldn't want to guess a date. And I wouldn't want to talk as if it's inevitable either, because it really isn't. It really is not. And there's a lot of doomsayers out there, a lot of Reagan-esque, Thatcherite kind of conservatives that just throw their hands up, want to throw in the towel and go, all is lost, all is doomed. And they do that because they actually get a kick out of being miserable and depressed. But as a Christian, we must always act from hope. We must always act from faith. We must always act from love. And despair is the very opposite of that. Go on, bro.
Yeah, you spoke about a Christian democracy. How would that look? Would it be more like having an Orthodox political party and a Catholic political party and a Protestant political party, and the public vote for which one of them? Is that how it kind of look, or something else?
Yeah, I mean, a Christian democracy is itself, again, a new idea. We've got to imagine what it looks like. There needs to be a debate amongst Christians what a new Christendom would look like. And then whatever conclusion you've come to, that's the one you push. And may the best idea win. But one possibility, certainly the one that I would be advocating, is that a Christian democracy would be anyone, Jew, Muslim, atheist, Hindu, could stand for election so long as that they are personally committed to the idea of upholding Christian values in society. And because as Christians, we are biblically bound to the idea of equality under the law. You can pass any Christian law you like, but everybody gets treated the same under the law. That is a Christian concept that we can't let go of. It is a concept that since we've abandoned Christianity in the West, we've now lost equality under the law. Does anyone know about the different sentencing things that have just been passed that are coming into effect, in which literally white Christians will be treated harsher than everybody else? Right? That idea, that loss of equality, guys, can we all have one conversation, please? That idea of equality under the law has been lost because we have lost our connection to Christianity. And so, in terms of what that would look like, for me, it would be that constitutionally, any politician could be removed from office if they were seen or found in a court to have worked against the upholding of Christian values in society. But insofar as you embody that and are committed to it, anyone should be allowed to stand in a Christian democracy. Go on, bro.
What do you think of UKIP, and is it a viable option?
So my views on UKIP, I like Nick Tenconi. I like his... and I've got a lot of respect for him as a political campaigner, but I don't think that UKIP has yet thought out its policies properly and deeply enough as Christians. I know that that is what they want. I know that's in their heart, but I don't think that they have necessarily had the deep enough formation in the faith to actually reflect that in their policies. And I actually think that some of their policies need to be corrected so that they more accurately accord to Christian values. Well, I mean, so for instance, you know, like they said today that they would stop churches being turned into mosques, right? Now, my answer to that, my thought about that is, well, what about churches being turned into pubs or nightclubs? And furthermore, are we really saying that no church can ever be used for any other purpose than a church if it's disused by the Christian community? So a lot of the sound bites that come out from UKIP, it's not clear what are the ideas behind it, and I'm not sure that they've been thought out thoroughly from a deep understanding of the Christian faith, though I feel that Nick wants to. And so I'm very sympathetic to Nick, and I wish he would just turn UKIP into a Christian party, overtly Christian party, and then I could really get behind him. But for the moment, I'm committed to the only Christian parties in the country, which are the Christian People's Alliance in England and Wales and the Christian Party in Scotland. Go on, you first. And yeah, now we're doing a repeat, so second rounds of questions. Go on.
Just like with the Islamists, there are millions of Muslims who are a bit more secularized, a bit more westernized, who are still sympathetic and will be complicit in the rise of the Islamists. Do we have any sense of the numbers of those in the UK at this point, and with the amount of indoctrination and subversion? Do we have any sense of the numbers of people who would be sympathetic to a new nationalistic Christian movement?
Yeah. Oh, well, and the sense of how many people would be in sympathetic to a new Christian kingdom, Christendom.
Such as that which you spoke.
So the thing is, it's a new discussion point within the church. It's only just emerged, and the reason why it's only just emerged is because the question around whether Christians have only since about the 1990s thrown off the liberal idea that Christianity shouldn't influence our politics. If you look at public debate before the 1990s, you would very often hear the refrain that your religion is a private matter, but it is not a public thing. Keep your religion to you, individualized. Don't bring it into politics. Has anyone ever heard that narrative?
Separation of church
and state. Right? But that narrative amongst Christians has diminished. Very much now these days, pretty much any Christian you speak to agrees with the idea that your understanding of your faith should influence how you vote. Put your hand up if you agree with the premise that your faith should influence how you vote and act. So to prove my point, virtually every hand is up. Now, the next question then, and that's why this argument is only just emerging, that's why this question is only just emerging as we deliberalize as Christians, as we free ourselves from liberalism as Christians, is now that we all agree that our faith should influence our politics, now the question is, well, what does a Christian politics look like? What does it mean to be politically Christian? And I want to say to you, my brothers and sisters, that being politically Christian is neither right wing nor left wing. It is Christ wing.
Amen.
Yeah? It is a Christian politique with Christian ambitions and a Christian agenda rooted in Christian identity. And it doesn't sit comfortably in either right-wing political narratives or left-wing political narratives, but actually includes aspects of both sides of the spectrum and questions that don't even get asked by that liberal spectrum of left-right-wing politics. Next question. I think you had a question, and then you.
It's going to be a follow-up. Would you ever consider creating a political party?
Why? No, I wouldn't ever consider creating a political party because there's already 2 Christian political parties in the UK. What we as Christians need to do is put our shoulder and our wheel and our efforts behind the Christian institutions that already exist, not creating new ones. That's the problem with Christians, and that's the problem with liberal modernity, is we've got this obsession with the new. Let's capture and use what already exists. And that means building on and working with the Christian political parties, the Christian pressure groups that already exist. If UKIP was a Christian party, I'd be saying vote UKIP and get involved with UKIP. But at the moment, it still isn't. And so I would say get involved with the Christian People's Alliance and the Christian Party, support groups like Christian Concern, the Christian Institute, and a number of other initiatives that embody Christian values.
Thanks, Bob. I just wanted to do a quick follow-up from a gentleman to my left was talking about tipping points a while ago. And I think you can make the case that some of these tipping points are already here. So, for example, we've got something like 85 civic Sharia courts up and down the country. Yes, they're not criminal, but they are civic. And to me, that represents the thin end of the wedge. So we are already in very dodgy territory. We've got a separate legal system, and governments have allowed that to develop.
Yeah, we do have a problem, and the problem that you've got to recognise is liberalism. Liberalism clears the space, it clears the ground for Islamization, because liberalism only cares about, well, who's the demos? Well, the demos is this group, so they get to choose what goes on. That's the only thing that a liberal, secular, humanist democracy cares about. And so the result is we've already got the thin end of the wedge of Islamization in the UK. But again, I want you to frame it in your minds, to recognise, well, if you agree with me that Islamization is a problem, then why don't you agree with me that liberalisation is the bigger problem? Because we've been far more liberalised than we have been Islamified. And so it's important to keep these things in perspective. Islamization is a small phenomena that is disproportionately represented in some areas over others that give it a magnifying effect. But it is an increasing phenomena. By contrast, liberalization is everything that we've grown up in and have lived in. We are living in the fishing bowl of a liberal society, and we need to change that before we can deal with the much smaller problem of Islamization. There's a lot of people with their hands up, and we've actually come to the end of our time. So are we all right to go for another? Right, we'll go for another 15 minutes and then we must stop. Go on.
Out of the people that, the Muslims that you've spoken to that have converted or are seeming to maybe convert, is there any common factors when talking to someone or a Muslim that you can tell this person is open to maybe receiving Christ? And is there any factors where you can see that they're completely closed? Is there any common factors that you manage to identify?
Yeah, if you want to evangelize Muslims, the Muslims that you're looking for are the Muslims to whom Islam already isn't working. So those are Muslims that aren't living the best Muslim life anyway. They're the ones that are the majority of the converts from the Islamic society. Now, what that therefore requires of us is that means to some degree what we'll be doing is we're going to be evangelizing people who, for whatever reason, have a higher level of social dysfunctionality, for whatever reason. And so as part of the discipleship of those converts, we need to make sure that included in that is a deliberate discipleship that increases their social functionality. You know, because those are the snippings around the edges that you'll take. Very few Muslims will just come in if they're well integrated into the Muslim community. And this comes to the question of demographics again, which we'll talk about next week, is that Muslims are very good at integrating new converts into their community. And when they convert, they you know, particularly among Salafists, they'll try to get them a wife, a job, and get them to move into a Muslim area, make Muslim friends, work for a Muslim boss. And the more you invest in a community, the harder it is for you to leave that community. Now, Muslims, we need to learn from them because they do community better than we do. Because a lot of churches think that what community means is having a coffee after church on a Sunday for 10 minutes. Right? That's not community. We're failing as Christians in terms of community, and we're particularly failing our brothers and sisters who convert from Islam. Because they convert from Islam and they lose their families, they lose their jobs, they lose their homes, their lives are at risk. And then what do we offer them in return for that great sacrifice? Oh yeah, come to a meeting on a Wednesday afternoon and then have 10 minutes of fellowship after a church on a Sunday. But beyond that, don't bother me. That is not community. And when we seek the converts from the Muslim community, we need to be ready to give them a home, a partner, a marriage partner, help them find a job. And we need to be building a community that feels more like a family. And don't you think if we actually integrated those two aspects that I've just mentioned into our normative church life, that our churches themselves just wouldn't be stronger generally for everybody? The problem is we are divided by weak and incompetent leaders who are led by their own cowardice and who treat their church congregations like a club or an NGO. But they don't see us, this mixture of people here, they don't see us as one people. And so they don't organize us as one people. And so our effective response is always diluted. And so we need to break out of our congregational divisions and break out of our denominational divisions, and we need to be working together as a people of God rather than I go to St. Luke's and that's what I go to and I go to St. Luke's church. And so the people that are least likely to convert are the ones who are most integrated into the Muslim community. The Muslims most likely to convert are the ones least integrated into the Muslim community. And that also teaches us a lesson as well. The Christians that are most likely to leave the faith are the ones least integrated into the community. The ones most likely to stay with the faith are the ones most invested in the community. It's all about building stronger communities. Go on.
Would you be able to just mention something about the spirit or the spirituality behind the religion, or is that nothing for us to worry about? Also,
the spirituality, what? Sorry.
What we can see is what we're dealing with, the politics and demographics. But what we can't see is what's behind it. Do you?
What I'm sorry, you're not clear in your question. What do you mean by the spirituality? Be more specific.
Is there a spirit behind Islam that's guiding it in a particular way?
So guys, we already know that as Christians we are committed to the belief that if anyone preaches another gospel apart from this, let them be accursed. Right? So as Christians, we already know that those that are not for Christ are against Christ. This is Christ's teachings. And so it's beyond trope, it's beyond blasé to say that Islam is antichrist. It's like, duh, of course, you know. But then again, so is liberalism. And so is Hinduism, and so is Sikhism, and so is Rabbinical Judaism, and so is atheism, and so is agnosticism, and so is anything that pulls us away from Christ. There is a problem within Christian circles that when it comes to the deep thinking about how we deal with real challenges, is that we over-spiritualize. That we start using spiritual sound bites as a way of getting away from the actual pragmatic thinking of what do we do about it. You know, and so I'm not so interested in talking about the obvious, you know, but there is a debate to be had with liberal Christians. Because liberal Christians will listen to a talk like this and they'll literally feel gut-wrenchingly sick. You know, because as far as they're concerned, we all worship the same God. You know, liberal Christians who, no doubt in my mind, had they lived in Nazi Germany, would have been giving the Sieg-Heil. Yeah? Liberal Christians just go along with whatever the culture tells them. So if the culture's Nazi, they're Nazi. If the culture's communist, they're communist. If the culture's multicultural relativism, they go along with multicultural relativism. It's just the temperament of the liberal Christian. They're always led by the dominant culture. And that's why we see liberal churches collapsing. So we have an argument to win with our liberal brothers and sisters to get them to recognize that the spirit behind Islam is not the Holy Spirit. That it is a different God and a different religion. Go on, bro. And sorry, I just want, before I take your question, is there anyone who has not yet asked a question that would like to? If you have not asked a question already, but you've been wanting to and not had a chance, go on.
I've had a few questions, but most...
No, I said anyone who's not asked a question.
I haven't asked a question.
Oh, all right, sorry, go on. My apologies.
All I was saying is that some other people have gone on the tack that I was going to ask anyway, but I think I'm a liberal Christian, so I don't know how to handle your last comment. And also, I don't understand what you're saying about demographic, like having churches and then the strongest one wins, because look, just like in the Muslim faith, there's different ways of believing or the way that you approach it, and the same way. So I wouldn't like to think there was only one church in my area, one type of church. You know, I would want, and I also wonder as well, I think you said it, that the Muslim people that convert to Christianity, I think sometimes it's people that are the most intelligent because they've thought it through and reacted very strongly against their own religion and realised it doesn't make any sense. Or
yeah.
So you could be right to some degree, but also I think very people who are thinking people as well would have left them.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to come back in just because of time.
Right.
So basically, you've made a number of points.
Yeah.
I mean, whether you're a liberal or not is for you to decide. I mean, from what some of the things that you've said, I think that maybe you're not as liberal as you might think you are. But in terms of, I'm not trying to, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I am not saying that Muslims who convert from Islam to Christianity are dumb. I agree with you. They're some of the smartest people. And the reason why they're some of the smartest people is because just consider what it must mean for a Muslim to reject Islam and become Christian. How much they know it comes with a price. So they would have thought about that a lot. And they would have definitely, before they make that judgment, they would have definitely thought it through precisely because of the price. And so, you know, the quality of the convert that comes from Islam to Christianity is very high in the sense of their devotion or their commitment. Whereas converts that go the other way, not so high, because it doesn't come with such a great cost, you know. And so, and I would love for the Benedict option to be ecumenical. Actually, that would be my preferred version of an ecumenical Benedict option. But I'm just a realist. You're not going to get Calvinists and Roman Catholics to be working in a Benedict option together. You might be able to get Methodists and Anglicans working together in a Benedict option, but you're not going to get, you know, the two extremes of the Reformation being able to work together. But I would love an ecumenical one. So from a practical point of view, the Benedict option works if it's organised around the different denominations of the one church. And as for the best church wins, well, it's just that some churches are going to do better than others, you know, in terms of their evangelism. You know, the Orthodox Church right now is undergoing a bit of a growth spurt, you know, because of a number of different reasons. You might have made another point, but I can't remember what it is. Guys, it's been a real pleasure. I hope that you've got something out of this. If you have not paid your bill behind the counter, remember that the tickets are going to the persecuted church, so it is important that you donate. And finally, if you thought that this talk was worth coming to, if you thought it edifying, please do come to next week's talk and bring a friend. Thank you very much.